Hey, Untold Radio Network fans. Want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jen Durrell.
Greetings to all my weirdos and weirdettes. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and we've got a show tonight which is going to look at some of the strangest and weirdest stories to come out of Pennsylvania. It's a heck of a book that we'll be talking about, and it's a heck of a guest. Our guest is an avid student of the paranormal. His eclectic background includes aspects of psychology, addictions, and rock journalism. He has a master's degree in communications from Bloomsburg University and a bachelor's degree in psychology from Aquinas College. Oh, that's probably Aquinas College, sorry. He's been interviewed on numerous podcasts, including Exploring the Bizarre with the legendary late Timothy Green Beckley and on Paranormal 60 with David Schrader. His book, Sheppton, The Myth, Miracle and Music, was featured on Australia's Mysterious Universe. He contributes to Fate magazine, Normal Paranormal, and Paranormal Underground, and his latest book, which we'll be talking about tonight, Coal Region Hoodoo, Paranormal Tales from Inside the Pit, has just been released. It's fascinating, and we're going to be chatting about just a few mysteries. The book's loaded with them, and that's what we'll be looking at on tonight's show. So I am delighted to welcome to Talking Weird, Maxim Furek.
Hey, Dean, thanks so much for having me on here. And let me tell you that your intro is the best in the business. I mean, I love the flying saucer coming out of the volcano. That's great. And I use the word flying saucer, not UAP. But
I like flying saucer too. We're kindred spirits. Incidentally, that was actually built by Doug Heidnik. He built all the intros for this network because it's his network. He's, of course, I think most people know, but those who don't, is the creator of Monster Quest. And he's one of, I think, the most genuine people in the media space of the paranormal. Just a wonderful man. So I'm delighted to be part of his network. Speaking about the paranormal, before we get into the book, I know you have a background in like rock journalism. How was that transition made from there to the paranormal?
Yeah, well, I've been asked that question a number of times, and I'll tell you what, I never went looking for the paranormal. The paranormal found me. Something was channeled through me. But I was writing a book about, I was writing a rock mythology connecting the 1971 song Timothy. That was a group called the Boys. They were from northeastern Pennsylvania. And as a rock journalist, a guy who had written numerous rock and roll books, I wanted to celebrate this accomplishment because Timothy was the highest charting song that we ever had in northeastern Pennsylvania. So this was our claim to fame. This is our Beatles and our Stones. So it was about cannibalism in a mine, and many people felt that the song Timothy was about the Shepton mine disaster of 1963. So I'm just putting 2 and 2 together, just writing this rock mythology, and all of a sudden I started to discover a number of paranormal elements in Shepton. And in 2015, I wrote the book about Shepton, and that opened up the doors to the paranormal. And I can't tell you, it was just amazing. It was like going from from A to B to C. I mean, it just happened. The doors opened, and as you read in the intro, I mean, I was welcomed and embraced, and and again, it wasn't that I was looking for that; it sort of found me.
We'll get to Shepton in a minute because, to be honest, I knew almost nothing about that story until I read your book, and it is just an incredible story. I can't believe that I was so unaware of it, considering the depth and weirdness of it. But maybe if you could explain to the readers the actual title of the book and what it means: Coal Region Hoodoo, Paranormal Tales from Inside the Pit.
Yeah, well, Coal Region Hoodoo was sort of a continuation of my paranormal journey. Shepton, the myth, miracle, and music really took off for me. And it's just amazing. I mean, to this day, we're still selling books and getting calls and talking about it as you are on your program. But what I decided was to continue on that journey, and I wrote a book called Coal Region Hoodoo. Now, hoodoo meaning either a blessing or a curse. And certainly in the case of Shepton, here you had 3 miners. And the question is, why was it that 2 of the miners received the blessing and they were extricated, whereas the 3rd miner, I mean, we don't even know, he received the curse. We don't even know what happened to him. There were allegations of cannibalism, but we just don't know. So with Coal Region Hoodoo, I decided to take a further look at Shepton, some of the paranormal and spiritual aspects that happened. And my book then is this. I take a look at the paranormal and the spiritual, and I try to bring them a little bit closer to the scientific. So that's my MO. That's my modus operandi. I'm trying to go and figure this all out. And Dean, I'll tell you what, I'm a paranormal researcher, but I consider myself more of an academic. I mean, I view this as a serious student of the occult. I'm just trying to learn, just trying to figure out, what the truth is, and and to try to figure this thing out, maybe through the lens of the lens of a scientist. So that's what I'm trying to do. And I think, in a sense, I'm sort of like J. Allen Hynek or Carl Sagan or some of these other people that gave us at least some definitions. And if I may, I wanted to call my Shepton book the Shepton Convergence, because there was a convergence of weird things that happened in Shepton. But why reinvent the wheel? I mean, Heidnik already gave us the levels of high strangeness. If there's an anomaly, a light in the sky, it's a low strangeness. But if that light stops your car and you see little green men and all that, I mean, that's a high level of strangeness. And he gave us a vocabulary to at least determine the significance of these anomalies, as he did with the close encounters, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th kind. So that was J. Allen Hynek that did so much for the paranormal, again, looking at it as I try to do, through a scientific lens. So that's what he did. But, I'm just, with me, the only thing I could say is that I am amazed at the acceptance and recognition that I've received from the paranormal community. I mean, I just can't tell you. It's been a wonderful celebration. I mean, thank you, all of you out there. I mean, for just reading my books and getting back to me, and it's just an amazing thing. I'm just glad to be here. So this is great for me. This is a great time in my career.
I like when you're talking about, you almost approach it like an academic, and you can tell that in the book. I loved how you would either start from a broader topic that you're looking at and then hone it into the specific case in Pennsylvania, or you'd start with the case and then you'd put it in a context which, broadened out. I've never experienced that in a regional specific book before. And I found that something that which was, again, I was pleasantly surprised by. Is that something you were very conscious of doing when you wrote the book?
Well, I don't know, maybe I write like an academic. I mean, maybe I write more. I try to write like a commercial writer, to give it some pop, so that people can read it and just go with the flow and go on the ride and all that. But I think I write as an academic. And for an example, in Coal Region Hoodoo, I have over 400 references to books and magazines and personal interviews. And I take pride in that, because I mean, I backed up my my narrative with quotes and research of other people. So I think that I bring a lot more people into the thing. And when you talk about, the Pennsylvania paranormal, yes, it may be that, but it also embraces so many other people that have, devoted their lifetime and their research to the paranormal. So they're in there too, like Heidnik and John Mack and, everybody else.
Let's get into some specific cases because, again, I loved it because some of the cases I was familiar with and some I was really not familiar with, including one you mentioned, Shepton. For people like me in the audience who might be unaware of what that mine collapse and the rescue and everything the two miners that got pulled out went through, can you maybe talk a little bit about their experiences?
Yeah. Well, first of all, with my experience, I wasn't looking for any kind of paranormal aspect. I was just going to writing a rock and roll book. But with the miners, there were 3 miners that were trapped for 2 weeks. They were trapped 330 feet below the ground. It became an international story. There were media people from the UK, Germany, and Japan that were there in Sheppton, Pennsylvania, this tiny little patch town. That's what we call it, a little patch town outside of Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Howard Hughes, the billionaire, sent tungstite drill bits to help with the rescue operation. Sheppton technology saved people in 2010 at the Chilean copper mine disaster. And Dean, when you say that you've never heard about Sheppton prior to this, why is it? I mean, I just can't believe that people haven't heard about Sheppton through the rescue technology. The rescue team developed the technology that saved those people in Chile, those 33 people, but yet no one knows about that. So Sheppton is just so obscure. But when the miners were finally extricated, the 2 of them, the townspeople said, well, what happened to the 3rd miner? So we had all of these horrible allegations of cannibalism. But as I was researching the story, I saw additional things like elements of life after death, of near-death experiences, and out-of-body experiences, as well as a whole plethora of paranormal themes that the miners saw. So this was just heavily steeped in something of the paranormal. I don't know if it was a vortex. I initially was going to call it the Sheppton convergence because of all of these things, but I didn't think the people would understand what that meant. But there's just a whole lot of things that they experienced down there. And and again, I'm glad that you read the book and you also found it fascinating because it's just an intriguing, narrative, of the paranormal. So, Dean, okay, so when we talk about Sheppton, we're talking about life after death, and that pretty much was the Pope John the 23rd. Pope John the 23rd had died. Pope John the 23rd had died in June of 1963, and Sheppton took place in August. So it became an example of life after death. Pope John the 23rd was canonized in 2014, and Vatican scholars claim that Sheppton was one of his miracles. You're canonized for your sainthood, for your piety, for your devotion, and all that, and also for the miracles. And Vatican scholars attributed at least 3 miracles to Pope John the 23rd. So that was one of the things that happened. Another thing was the what we call the out-of-body experience. That was something that Davy Fellon and Hank Throne, the 2 rescued miners, claimed happened to them. And when you take a look at this out-of-body experience, in my book, Coleridge and Hoodoo, we talk about the nope, can't do it. Okay. We talk about Saint Teresa of Avila. She was a 14th century Spanish mystic, and Saint Teresa believed that through prayer and meditation, we can reach states of ecstasy and rapture and something that she called the flight of the soul. And that is an out-of-body experience, and that was something that was experienced by the two rescued miners. They talked about actually going out of their bodies, their physical bodies, and being almost like astral projection and looking down on the rescue team that was trying to extricate, the three trapped miners. So that was an example of an out-of-body experience that, I believe was attributed to their prayer and meditation, as cited by Saint Teresa of Avila, the Spanish mystic. So Pope John the 23rd, Dean, appeared at Sheppton in August, even though he had died in June. And when I discussed this with Roman Catholic priests and nuns, they explained that all three of his miracles happened after he had died. And I asked, well, how does that happen? I mean, what's the rationale for that? And they said, well, Pope John the 23rd died. He went to heaven where he got his power, and then came down, and he was able to go and work those miracles. And so that was the explanation for that.
What a consummate professional you are, Max. No, unfortunately, for some reason, the internet just died here, just totally dead. Came back, thank goodness.
Okay, so we're okay now?
We're all good. It's all perfect. It's still going. I'll even cut out my little explanation of that in the audio version, but the video version, people will actually have to suffer it. But no, the whole Shepton story is just absolutely phenomenal. And I can't believe it doesn't have a bigger part in the pages of the paranormal, to be honest. This is something which seems to be ripe for more, I suppose, exploration, although you did a wonderful job. With as far as the accusations of cannibalism, was there anything that found to give credence to that? I know supposedly they didn't find the third person, but I would imagine there would have had to have been some evidence if somebody had been eaten in the cave-in.
Yeah. Well, before we talk about the evidence, the Chicago Daily News had an article about Sheppton, and they talked about coal mining lore, which in cases of cannibalism, and this is not unique, but in cases of cannibalism, they would cannibalize the shortest person. So in the case of Sheppton, it was Louis Bowe. He was like 5'4", something like that. But when they mentioned that in the Chicago Daily News, Davy Fallon said, only evil men would ask such a question. He goes, we never did that. So that's what he said. The other thing was, I knew a gentleman from Hazleton, Pennsylvania. He was a professional, and I interviewed him extensively, but he asked for anonymity. He didn't want his name to be used because he's a very successful and popular, professional guy. But he knew Davy Fallon, and he asked him those questions. What happened to the third miner? Was there cannibalism involved? Did you actually see your ancestors sitting on those golden stairways? Things like that. And so he was able to give me this kind of information, this professional. So we have the word, confirming that, some that they didn't, that it never happened. But the other thing was, after the two miners were extricated, because they never found the third one. But what they did was they sent a guy down there, and he was the president of the Independent Miners Union. And he went down there, and they called him Mr. X, because they didn't want his wife to know that he was going back down into the thing. So it was really clandestine. They had a truck driving up to the rescue site. It was covered with tarps. He got out of there, went down the borehole, and he looked around, and there was no blood, bones, any kind of evidence of anything, untoward happening. So there was never anything found. The other thing too that people that aren't familiar with mining may not know, but typically when there was a mine cave-in, a lot of times those miners would just die down there. They would just bulldoze the entrance. They would put concrete over it. They would have a shrine, and the Catholic priest would do the last rites of absolution, and that was it. In the case of Shepton, that was probably going to happen, but the one brother of Davy Felon, who was estranged, I guess he didn't talk to Davy for 15 years, but I guess he was trying to go and atone for whatever, and he convinced the one miners union to go down there and try a rescue attempt. And so that's what happened. But it was one person that actually did that. So they thought that if those miners were alive, they would be in a tiny little monkey hole, they called them, a little monkey shaft, where they would keep food and tools. And they went and they dug that down there. And what's interesting, what's crazy, what's bizarre about Sheppton is that they had a drill rig, and they knew exactly where they were going to go and drill to reach the miners. Well, the drill broke down before they got to that place. So they thought, what the hell, we'll drill anyway. So they drilled before they got to that place, and they found them. So, how do you, explain that? I mean, that's just bizarre, so, but that was Sheppton. Sheppton it shouldn't have even been called Sheppton. It should have been called the Oneida disaster, because it took place in Oneida. But Sheppton, Oneida are twin patch towns. They're close together, and the media got it wrong and just started to call it Sheppton. So that's why we're talking about the Sheppton mythology rather than the Oneida mythology. It gets weirder and weirder, but
you really get an understanding in the book of how important the mining industry is, or its impacts, both positive and negative, on that state. And perhaps the greatest example of the negative impact is Centralia. Can you talk a little bit about Centralia? Another fascinating thing. I think I'd heard about it, but I knew very little about the details.
Yeah, Coleridge and Hoodoo takes a look at all that. Sheppton is real close to a place called Centralia. Sheppton is in Schuylkill County. Centralia is in Columbia County, and that's where I'm from, and that's Richard Sharpe Shaver is from, Berwick, Columbia County. But what happened was, it was back in around 1962, and the people of Centralia, Pennsylvania, which was at one point a very thriving, prosperous coal town, another sort of patch town, with a lot of coal mining related industry there. But what they were getting ready for a holiday, and they decided to take all the trash from the community and just burn it in this little coal mine thing. Well, what happened was the fire ignited the anthracite, which is a very slow burning but very high heat type of coal. And northeastern Pennsylvania is sort of endemic with anthracite coal. As a matter of fact, we claim that we were the engine that drove the Industrial Revolution. It was predicated on anthracite coal. But anyway, in Centralia, there was a fire that they just couldn't put out. It started around 1962. It's continuing to this day. The horror movie Silent Hill was filmed about Centralia. And in my book, I talk about the Irish Catholic priest who was beat up by the legendary Molly Maguires. And the priest claimed that after, he put a curse on the town of Centralia, and said at the end, the only thing left standing will be St. Ignatius, the Roman Catholic Church. And today, even that is gone. But Sheppton has maybe 5 families, or Centralia has maybe 5 families that are still living there. The government, the state government bought them out. A lot of conspiracies about why they did that, that there's all kinds of rich coal underneath. But it's a ghost town. I go through there every now and then, and it's just a ghost town. And Centralia had been the 6th most visited tourist site in Pennsylvania. All these kids and these paranormal people coming to take a look at what was called Graffiti Highway, which was a highway that was, you could see the steam coming up, and you could see the highway being melted from the hell that was underneath there, and from the raging infernal. But all the college kids would go and graffiti this this highway. There would be pink penises, spray painted and everything else. So it was pretty bizarre. But a couple of years ago, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania decided to go and just cover it up with tons of dirt. And so now, though, every time I would go there, I would see all kinds of, young people and paranormal hunters. But now it's pretty much diminished. But that Sheppton and Centralia are in my backyard. I mean, I'm like surrounded by paranormal, weirdness.
And Centralia kind of gave the inspiration to, I think, Roger Avery when he wrote Silent Hill, right? That miscovered, spooky ghost town of that film based on the video game, but I think they probably changed it a bit for the film.
Yeah, no, you're correct. His dad took him there. I think his dad was an engineer, and he was introduced to Centralia. But I mean, back in the day, you would drive through Centralia and you would see all this steam and smoke, all the salt. It was like hell. It was driving through Hades. You would see all this stuff coming up through from the side of the road. You would see highways that were melted and buckled. I mean, man, you would drive over that. It was pretty bizarre. I mean, that was nuts. So, and that's what drew the people there. I mean, people, that's another question. Why do they gravitate to stuff like this? The bizarre, the paranormal. I mean, there's just like the spider, the fly going to the spider web. So, but the northeastern Pennsylvania seems to have that. And in my book, that is Pennsylvania centric, we talk about Bigfoot and UFOs, and Pennsylvania is one of the top states for that kind of weirdness, for Bigfoot sightings, and not just Bigfoot, but Bigfoot and UFO sightings at the same time. So,
yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because you have 2 chapters in the book dedicated to Bigfoot. You have 1 or 2 dedicated to UFOs, and of course, you speak of 2 relatively internationally famous Bigfoot researchers who are Pennsylvania based. And one of them is Timothy Renner, who I think I saw you were speaking at an event with. And the other, of course, is Stan Gordon, who's written extensively and researched extensively the UFO and Bigfoot's crossover, or, cases which include both of those things. So maybe let's chat a little bit about the importance of Bigfoot to Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Well, we know that there's a lot of Bigfoot sightings. My wife and I were just out to dinner with our neighbors, just say 3 weeks ago. And just out of the blue, my neighbor, who was a medical technician, told me that when he was visiting his son's gravestone at the cemetery, as he was leaving, he saw on the tree line 2 Bigfoot creatures. One was black, the larger one. The smaller one was cinnamon colored. And I asked him questions, and he said that the Bigfoot creatures walked like human beings. They looked at him not out of fear, but more out of curiosity. And then they left and they went into the tree line. So the next 2 days, my wife and I went out there and we looked around looking for any signs. We couldn't find any, but I did contact Stan Gordon, who is the Bigfoot researcher in Western Pennsylvania. And I did contact Tim Renner, who's in Eastern Pennsylvania, and I gave him my neighbor's contact information with my neighbor's permission. And so they did contact him. And this is important because this took place in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Typically we hear about Bigfoot encounters in Western Pennsylvania. There's an area called the Chestnut Ridge. And Stan Gordon writes about that a lot, and I talk about that in Co-Region Hoodoo. But Chestnut Ridge is about a 100-mile stretch outside of Pittsburgh that goes from that area down to West Virginia, and it's heavily wooded. But we've seen the majority of Pennsylvania-based Bigfoot sightings there. A lot of these have been documented by Stan Gordon. What's interesting is that whenever the state police get a report of a Bigfoot creature or a UFO, they'll say, well, just call Stan. So report it to Stan. But Stan is like our scientist. Stan has in his books like Strange. I have the book right here. Yeah, hang on. This is thank you. Sorry. Strange Invasion. Mm-hmm. Stan Gordon.
That's a good book.
He documents all this stuff, like John Doe sights a Bigfoot creature at 5 o'clock in the evening, going to feed his dog. I mean, all this detailed stuff. But what's interesting about the Bigfoot narrative is that you have thousands of people that are saying the same thing. They're saying that here's a creature that's 6, 8, 10 foot tall, shaggy, smells, smelly ape, Sasquatch, that doesn't walk, but it glides, that the eyes don't reflect lights, but it emits light, and then it gets kind of strange when some of the research talk about the bilocation, where you see Bigfoot in front of you and then it's behind you. So again, we're looking, there's some of us that are the flesh and blood researchers. We want to see the evidence, but some of the people are saying, well, the question is, why don't we see the remains of Bigfoot in the forest? Well, they'll use the same thing. What about the remains of the black bears? I mean, how long does the carcass of a black bear remain in the woods, in the forest, before they're devoured by everything? Again, that's what what they do. They're part of the whole scheme, the whole survival of the fittest thing. So that's one response, that the whatever's in the forest, the predators, devour the bones and the meat and everything else. So, but we don't have the information that we're looking for. And with Bigfoot, it comes down to maybe 3 possibilities. That Bigfoot is a physical presence. And again, we're looking for definite proof that Bigfoot is there. Bigfoot could be a psychological manifestation, as Jung spoke of the collective unconsciousness, that maybe somehow we conjure up an image, psychically, and create something. And then the third one, of course, is Albert Einstein talked about the wormhole theory, that there's bridges or wormholes that connect space-time continuums, where people can go from point A to point B like in a flash, in a second. And there's the possibility, again, just a theory, that Bigfoot is able to traverse this interdimensional highway, this parallel universe, this whatever it is. But I like the first one, the physical one. And Dean, I don't know if you remember the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street, which is one of the classic rock albums. But Keith Richard had a song called I Just Want to See His Face. So like a reggae thing. He goes, don't tell me about God and don't tell me about miracles and everything else. I want the proof. Just I want to see his face. So, and that's what I think a lot of us researchers are looking for. And look at the parallels, though, between Bigfoot and UFOs. What are they? Physical, psychological manifestations, or interdimensional? Again, we don't know, but a lot of us are looking.
I think let's talk about that for a bit, because it interests me, and the fact that you brought up Chestnut Ridge, which is, I think, so important, perhaps, in places like Chestnut Ridge around this world, places that John Keel talked about as being window areas, that you mightn't just see a Bigfoot there. It might also be a UFO hotspot, or there might be other strange cryptids or strange lights floating around at night. So Chestnut Ridge, to me at least, the different types of experiences which are seen in one area, and often, as Stan Gordon, as you know, we'll talk about, that somebody will see a UFO and a Bigfoot, or a Bigfoot, as you were saying before, will just dematerialize in front of somebody, or they'll have a strange non-animal glow to their eyes or something, or all of these type of things which don't seem to fit perhaps an easy flesh and blood explanation. But I think the window area idea is one of those things which makes me lean to a more paraphysical, whatever that means, interpretation, because if there's a spot which has all of these things, it starts to make you think, well, maybe all of these things are more related than we've traditionally thought about in the different segments of the paranormal. So a standard Bigfoot investigator might just look at Bigfoot, a standard ufologist might just look at UFOs, a standard paranormal investigator might just look at ghosts. But when you see all of these phenomena happening in the same place and sometimes at the same time, at least to me, it tends to make me think maybe they're related. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's a great thought. When I first heard about the connection between Bigfoot and UFOs, I just thought that's weird. I was in total disbelief and denial. I just thought that was so silly. I didn't even consider it. But I started to do my research and I found out, wait a second, there's a lot of these connections, Bigfoot and UFOs. So just maybe, as you were saying, just maybe that lends credence to that interdimensional thing, that maybe Bigfoot is more than just flesh and blood, that there's this paranormal element to it that is manifested by UFOs and other paranormal experiences. So I think there's something happening there. And again, I have no idea what it is. I'd love to be the one to say, hey, this is what it is. But we know. But what we're seeing is a lot of those connectors with UFOs. So whatever that is. And Stan talks about that a lot in his books. And it's just amazing the commonality that Stan Gordon has found in these to Bigfoot and UFO sightings. Very similar.
Yeah, Stan's research is awesome. You mentioned Shaver before, of course. Anybody who watches Talking Weird or Mysterious Library regularly or listens to them knows that I'm particularly interested in Raymond Palmer and Richard Shaver. Can you talk a little bit about Shaver and your connections to Shaver and his role in so many of the things that we think about now?
I'm like honored to say that. Richard Sharpe Shaver and I were both born in Berwick, Pennsylvania, and
wow.
Last year, there's a place called the Jackson Mansion, and it's a really nice Victorian mansion in Berwick, Pennsylvania. And they have the Haunted Jackson, like around Halloween, they have a thing. So my one friend was doing the narrative of Dr. Frederick Santee, who was a high priest for Coven. So that was one of the stories that we told at the Jackson Mansion. But my part was to talk about Richard Sharpe Shaver. And most Berwickians have never heard of him. So I was just delighted to be the one to say, listen, he's one of our, most interesting, most fascinating citizens. And so I was able to go and talk about Richard Sharpe Shaver, and just had so many people ask questions, and they were just amazed at, the fact that here's this guy that claimed that, first of all, in Richard Toronto's book, War over Lemuria, Richard talks about how, Richard Toronto talks about how Richard Sharpe Shaver loved his days in Berwick. They were like Mayberry, like just sitting on those porches and watching people walk by and running up to a young girl and giving her a kiss on the cheek and all this stuff, Richard Sharpe Shaver. And then the stories that he told, and then Ray Palmer writing these stories as true narratives. So that was one thing. Ray Palmer said that, but then you had thousands of people that bought into it and said, yes, this got to be happening. You had people that had the Shaver mystery stories. They would get together and talk about Richard Sharpe Shaver. They would get together and say, wait a second, I also hear voices. So it was almost like one of the first therapy sessions. So there was a lot going on there. But one thing that I point out, and I don't know if it's been pointed out before, but I believe that Richard Sharpe Shaver was an early advocate for reform in mental institutions. Now, again, with Richard Sharpe Shaver institutionalized, we believe that he most likely had a whole lot of shock treatment. And the reason for that is because shock treatment was a lot cheaper than using Thorazine and Meloril. Shock treatment was a lot cheaper than using the psychotropic meds. So when Richard Sharpe Shaver wrote about being tortured by the Diros and all the other subterraneans, I believe he was metaphorically and symbolically talking about some of the so-called treatment, the torture that he received at the mental institution in Michigan, and he was advocating for reform. And I talk about this, and I believe that that's true. He's more than just a guy that wrote about sci-fi. He's controversial, but what's interesting about Richard Sharpe Shaver is that we look at him with significance and relevance and validity. No matter what he said, we view Richard as one of our paranormal heroes, and I just can't say enough about him. I mean, it's great to take a look at this, and I guess about the controversy between me and Richard Toronto, and
Yeah, I think you suggest you should tell the audience, but I think you suggested that Shaver was kind of a charlatan, maybe, and Toronto said otherwise.
Yeah, what I did was, and I did walk this back, but I was saying that Richard Sharpe Shaver was the con artist, but I really think that it was Ray Palmer. I think Ray Palmer was the puppet master that was sort of like manipulating Richard Sharpe Shaver, and Richard Sharpe Shaver was glad to be writing his stories and glad to having them published and glad to have the infamy and everything. But I think that Ray Palmer, took advantage of this, and then he outed his best friend. I mean, he told the world that Richard Sharpe Shaver had been a mental patient, rather than being a prisoner of the Duros. And a friend doesn't do that to a friend. I mean, Ray Palmer had his, I think, had other motives, and I don't know, but they remained friends. And I always thought that there should be a motion picture, a black and white motion picture, just like Ed Wood, about Richard Sharpe Shaver and Ray Palmer rap. I mean, that's the best story out there. And I mean, I
think Hollywood should. I'm hoping the documentary I'm making might inspire a bigger budget to do a biopic type narrative feature film, because it's such an amazing story. It's more amazing than anything in Amazing Stories. I probably have a kinder view of Palmer. I have a kind view of both of them. Yeah. I think that Palmer believed much of what Shaver said, but he was never on board for the physical reality of it, or not later, because Palmer looked at much of this phenomenon, and he'd like to change his mind and encourage conversation. I think you might even say something like that in the book. But one of the things that he suggested was that because we know Shaver was in a mental hospital at the same time he said he was with the Deros,
right,
Palmer kind of spun that to say, well, that means that the experiences he was having were somehow metaphysical or paranormal. So he always thought that Shaver was being genuine in what he was saying. One of the big issues of contention between Palmer and Shaver was that Palmer was a spiritualist in many ways. He wasn't necessarily somebody who followed a traditional Judeo-Christian kind of belief system, right, but he believed in a spiritual world. Yeah. And Shaver was an atheist who thought there were genuine creatures in the caves with advanced technology, and this could explain all of this type of phenomenon. So there was an issue of contention, I think, between them as to what their explanation was. Palmer was somebody who republished the Wapsi Bible, which was a type of channeled Bible of the 19th or 18th century. And so he believed in this realm of all these other entities. And he thought that's where the Deros and the Teros were, not in the caverns. So I think there's an interesting story to be told about that interplay. And like we were talking today, ironically, about the interpretation of Bigfoot today. Some people will dig in and say it's flesh and blood, while some people will say it's paraphysical. In the UFO realm, some people will say it's nuts and bolts, while some people will say it's from another dimension. So it's interesting to see that these germs of disagreement which still exist within the broader paranormal communities, you can look back to see Shaver and Palmer discussing these things way back in the day. So yeah, it's fascinating, I think.
Yeah. I did want to just say one other thing that's unrelated to all of this, but I'm working on my summer project is a flying saucer book, and it's called The Flying Saucer Esoteric, Comprehensive Listing of History's Most Fantastic UFO Events.
Oh, wow.
And we do talk about the FBI coming after Rapp and Richard Sharpe Shaver for initiating the UFO craze and all this. But I believe this is going to make some noise in the UFO community. I believe I'm looking at, flying saucers, UAPs, from a different perspective. And I'm really excited. But Dean, what I did was I decided that this summer, I'm a prolific reader, but I decided that the only thing I'm going to read is flying saucer literature from scientists, from astronomers, from hoaxers. I mean, the whole thing. And it's just like I'm totally into it. And, it's a wonderful feeling. But the book is getting done. Yeah. So it's, love to tell you about it when it gets published.
I can't wait. What, just out of interest for myself now, what do you think so far out of what you've read about is one of the stranger cases?
Well, what I'm going to talk about are two things. One, that I have personally seen numerous flying saucers that have been documented
Wow.
and validated by the United States. The other thing is, in my book, I'm going to talk about the first three invasions by Mars, and the first recorded instance where an Earthling was killed by a Martian. So that'll be in my book.
Wow.
Not hoax, not poppycock, but scientific data. So there you go. The Flying Saucer Esoteric by Maxim W. Furek.
I can't wait. I hope that Shaver and Palmer get a look in there as well.
Yeah, they will be. Yeah, they deserve to be in there. So, well, this is great. I really appreciate you having me on your program, and I hope that some of your listeners may be interested in taking a look at Coal Region Hoodoo, because I think it's eclectic, it's comprehensive, and what I tried to do with Hoodoo was slot the spiritual and the paranormal a little bit closer to the scientific. So that's what it is. I've been told that it's well written and documented, and I think, if anything, I've been able to distill a complex topic or a number of topics into something that's understandable and readable. So yeah, so that's what that was what my goal was. And
We still have a little time according to my clock here. Mind you, I had that little hiccup before, so maybe my clock went funny. But is there something we didn't talk about in that book that is something you were particularly interested in? Because there's so many cases, but is there another interesting case in there that you'd like to share with listeners that we didn't touch on?
Well, one thing when I talk about the spiritual, I'm talking about the apparition of Pope John the 23rd, the miracle, life after death. He died in June. Shepton was August. He manifested himself for 2 weeks, so they saw him. St. Teresa of Avila, her out-of-body experience, the flight of the soul. And then the other thing, again, in the spiritual realm, I was personal friends with Ed and Lorraine Warren. And Ed and Lorraine were the Roman Catholic demonologists from Connecticut. They were on a 15-city tour in 1988 to promote the haunted. And that was about the Smurl Haunting in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, again, in my backyard. The Smurl Haunting, Sheppton and Centralia are within, say, 30 miles of where I live in Berwick. So all this weird stuff was happening locally. But I was friends with Ed and Lorraine Warren. They would talk about doing battle with demons, how they would invoke, how Ed Warren would have invoked the spirit of Jesus Christ, of Padre Pio, of St. Michael the Archangel to do battle. And with Roman Catholic priests and nuns that I've spoken with, there's a strong belief that evil exists, that the devil exists, that the devil wants us to believe that he or she is only a myth. I personally tell people to stay away from things like Ouija boards, tarot cards, fortune tellers, seances. I believe for the weak and vulnerable, they could be a portal to something very uncomfortable and dark and wicked. So
I think that's good advice.
Yeah. But with the Smurl Haunting, there was Father Treebolt who came down, the bishop in the diocese. He didn't have an exorcist who was capable enough to purge the demon from the Smurl Haunting. So he requested Father Treebolt to come down from New York State. He came down. It took 4 times for him to purge the Smurl Haunting of the demons. But prior to that, he had been at another haunted place, haunted house, and he wasn't able to get rid of the demon. And what he said was, and it's in my book, Coal Region Hoodoo, he was saying that some places are just evil. All you can do is get your belongings. Don't say what your plans are inside the house and just leave. Leave that place alone because that place is evil. So the same thing with St. Teresa of Avila. When she spoke about evil, she said that the devil, Satan, would love to go and get his or her hands on a member of the clergy, someone who has given their life to this life of piety, and whether it's a rabbi or a priest or minister, or whatever, or an imam. It doesn't matter, just an amazing thing. I was skeptical about writing a chapter called Roman Catholic Mysticism because I thought I'd get a whole lot of pushback, from people that, maybe from ignorant people that would think that I was doing something wrong or, castigating the religion, whatever. But that wasn't the case. And, but I've had people thank me for what I wrote in the spiritual room. And especially I've had several Wiccans come up and thank me for my portrayal of Dr. Frederick Santee, the high priest of the Coven of the Kata, and that they said I was very respectful of the coven. One thing that Dr. Santee did tell me, and I had a chance to interview him numerous times, but he's in my book, but Dr. Santee said that you have a choice of either using the right pathway, which is the pathway of helping and healing, or the left pathway, we're putting on the spell or the curses. But if you were to choose the left pathway, then karma enters the picture, and karma, it will come back on you tenfold, what harm you put out there. So karma plays a part in that as well.
It's interesting you're talking about Ed and Lorraine Warren and Catholic mysticism and the like. A regular guest on Talking Weird, and has been even since before we came on the Untold Radio Network, is Ed Schultz, who used to be one of the exorcists for Ed and Lorraine Warren. And he's actually almost finished in fact, I think he has finished now, his book, which is, he's written a number of books, but this is his more autobiographical piece called Confessions of a Psychic Priest, which looks at some of the things he was, because that's what he used to be called back in the day when he wrote for Fate magazine and was in People and things like that. He was the psychic priest. But it is interesting, the intersections between religion and mysticism and the paranormal and all these things, which don't often seem to necessarily go together if you just go to a standard church service on a Sunday morning. But there are all of these strange undercurrents which are always bubbling beneath the surface, almost like a battle between good and evil, popping up in places.
I know Madonna evidently was dabbling in the Kabbalah. That's the Jewish mysticism, and but with Roman Catholic mysticism, I talk about it. I've done presentations called Roman Catholic Mysticism, and I have a room filled with Catholics just to hear this, because the church typically doesn't talk about this. Doesn't talk about the miracles and apparitions and demonology and exorcism and all that, and the realms of the spirit world. But I do, because I find it fascinating, and that's fine. And I do it in a respectful manner. I'm not, but I find it really intriguing and fascinating as much as Bigfoot and UFOs and all the rest. So that's in my book.
You mentioned your UFO sightings before. Before we go, have you had other paranormal experiences or any you'd like to talk about?
No, just that I have two things. Anything that is good and positive, I wouldn't talk about, because in the case of the Shepton miners, Dave Fallon said there were some things that happened that he would take to the grave, he would never talk about. And I believe that there was something miraculous, spiritual, intimate, personal that he experienced, and out of respect, he just didn't talk about that. That's what I think it was. And the same thing with me. If in fact I've had anything like that, I wouldn't talk about it for the same reasons. But talking about evil, I know as a college student, we did a lot of stupid things, like trying to conduct seances and have conjuring up some really wicked people. This was just stupid. But we did this, and I was terrified at the result. So I won't do that again. But again, that was just we were in college, and we were I guess that's what we did at the time. We were on the journey and experimenting and all that. But no, the thing that people should be a little bit more concerned. There's a lot of young people running into these alleged haunted houses, and I don't know if they're seeking out the spooks and the ghosts and the demons, but they might just find something there that they can't control. So that's something to be. Nobody's talking about that and warning about it, but I think we should be talking about that because, evil does exist, and and it may be in those alleged haunted houses.
I agree. I think that people shouldn't open doors that they can't close. An occult friend told me that once. And I do think because of the popularity of paranormal television over the last decade or two, it's encouraged people to think it's just, like going on any other tourist adventure. People who consider themselves legend trippers or paranormal investigators or whatever, they label themselves as. Now, I'm sure there are some people who are canny enough and perhaps have the ability and the psychological strength to navigate that type of space. But yeah, teenagers or people who might be drawn to such ideas because of a psychological weakness or something, and then are poking around, regardless even incidentally of the existence of a spiritual world or not. I do think there is a spiritual world, but even to throw that overboard, to start opening these kind of psychic doorways where you think you're communicating with things. Right. I do think you're absolutely right. I think this is something that the paranormal community hardly ever talks about, because it's like you don't want to talk about the problems which your belief system or yourself are really a part of. But you're right, it's totally ignored almost.
Yeah. I'm sure that in some places I wouldn't be invited to the table because some of my ideas are maybe go against the popular themes, but that's okay. There's room for everybody at the table. There's room for a lot of different opinions, and that's why these podcast shows like yours are just so informative and so just wonderful, because they expand the narrative. They give us more another way to look at things, and I hope I've done that. I mean, I hope that what I have to say is somewhat unique and just opens up the dialogue just a little bit. I mean, if that's the case, then I'm gratified. But that's maybe by little steps, little increments, we could go and make this larger and maybe see it in its totality. Maybe that's what this is all about.
No, I think your book is incredibly insightful. And do you want to tell people how they can get a copy of Coleridge Hoodoo, Paranormal Tales from Inside the Pit?
Yeah, well, first of all, the go-to place is Amazon.com. So, Jeff Bezos needs the money. So, don't edit that out. This is, there's a disclaimer here. So, but you can get it on Amazon.com. And if you do, please leave a review. I mean, it means a lot to us authors. The other thing, if you'd like an autographed copy, you could contact me at www.maximfurek.com. And just contact me there, and I could send you a copy of the book and autograph it. So that'd be great. And us authors really do appreciate people supporting our books. We appreciate when you give us a review on Amazon. And Dean, I can't tell you how much I appreciate what you're doing here on your podcast for me and Coleridge and Hoodoo. It's just a wonderful thing to be able to have this platform, to tell people about my research and some of my philosophy. So this is important to me.
Well, thank you so much, Max. I enjoyed our conversation. I very much enjoyed your book. I'd encourage anybody out there who wants a book which is very different to almost anything else out there at the moment. Very well written, very insightful, looks at all types of phenomena and puts it, which I love most, within a broader context, which is something, again, which I think is missing in a lot of paranormal writing. Let's get you back on when the UFO book drops, though. Do we know about when? Do you know about when that will be? Do you have an estimated time of when you might release that, or?
Yeah, it's going to be 2023. I'm working on it like a madman. I mean, I'm possessed, but we're getting close, and I like the way it's evolving. I mean, I think this is going to be different. This flying saucer esoteric is something that I think every paranormal person should have in his or her library, and that's going to be how good it is. So I'm excited. So it's not a compilation, it's not an encyclopedia, but it's like a time machine through the wondrous world of the UFO. So that's what it is.
How can I avoid getting that? Well, thank you so much for visiting with us. And until I talk to you and everybody else, keep it weird.
Okay. Thanks, Dean.